So I was walking through Bass Pro to pick up a large handgun sleeve for my range bag, and as I was looking, I noticed there was a handgun powder I didn't recognize. Accurate 11 FS. I looked it up, and it seems like a pretty good Magnum handgun powder, and for use with like 300 blackout and stuff like that. The powder burn chart puts it a little bit slower than H110 and accurate number 9, so it should be able to reach like those H110 velocities without the usual fireball that accompanies H110, as the FS stands for flash suppressed. The main reason I bought it though was because it was on deep discount, and I'm kind of looking for powder deals whenever I can get them. This was a full $10 cheaper than accurate number 9 and $15 cheaper than H110. So it seems like it could be a pretty cost effective 44 Magnum powder. And they also had 8-pound bottles of it, and those were also on pretty steep discount. So I kind of wanted to test this out to see if it was worth getting. Now, when I got this bottle, it had like this thick layer of dust on it. So I think it's been sitting on that shelf for years. It also has a black cap on it. All the accurate powders seem to have red caps on it. So again, I think it's probably fairly old at this point. Now, let's take a look at the load data, and this is actually kind of where we run into our first issue with this powder. So it seems like the Western Powder Manual is really the only load data source for this powder. Looking around, it looks like it came out maybe around 2017, so it's a fairly new powder, and none of my reloading manuals actually have it listed for 44 Magnum. If anyone knows a good source for more load data out there, please let me know. But looking at what we have available, the velocities for the 180 grain XTPs are kind of crazy. 1900 feet per second through an 8-inch barrel, and I wouldn't be surprised if they would get up to rifle speeds through my lever action. But I'm more interested in the 240 grain projectile since I have a ton of them. Unfortunately, they use the Sierra jacketed hollow cavity, which is like one of the most expensive 44 mag bullets out there outside of the Barnes all copper ones. Since there isn't a ton of load data out there, I'm actually just going to go ahead and buy a box of them so I can use them to compare to the more common, like cheaper XTPs and the bulk zero bullets I have. This way, I can compare, I can save one of them for the future and have 4 or 5 240 grain projectiles to compare everything against in the future. It's such a slow powder, I'm going to assume I can't really get into too much trouble pressure-wise, and I'm also going to guess that it's going to have close to 100% fill volume with these cartridges. The 240 grain Sierra hollow points use a range of 19.2 to 22.6, so a little bit wider of a range than the H110. I think for my ladder, I'm going to start at 20 grains and go up by 0.5 grain steps, so 20, 20.5, 21, 21.5, and I'll probably stop there. I might go up to 22 depending on what the case fill looks like, or if I'm worried about compressed loads, I'm going to stop right there. If this works well, I can always go up farther from that point anyways, but since I'm fairly inexperienced with this powder, I'm going to give myself a little bit of buffer from the max chars. And, I'll see once I get the bullets in, and I'll pick this up when I get the Sierra bullets in. Okay, it's been a few days and I got the Sierra bullets in, and they look really nice. The fronts seem pretty flat from the ones I've looked at, and they are scored a bit around the edge, so I do think they'll expand all right. The lead seems soft-ish, I guess. I'm liking the look of these. It's a shame they're so expensive. Let's take a look at the dimensions compared to the XTP and the Nozzlers. Well, I started just looking at 3 bullets, but everything I touch turns into a huge mess, so I figured I may as well get the average lengths of everything so I can, compare these in the future when working up loads using different powders. FYI, for anyone watching this, I really should have just loaded up like 21 grains of the accurate 11FS and not bother doing anything else, but I think it's kind of fun overanalyzing everything. For this exercise, I'm just going to deal with the Sierra 44 Magnum. Our average case length is 1.75 inches, which is right at trim length for 44 mag. For the Sierra bullets, the average length of all the bullets was 0.747 inches. So if I go with the recommended cartridge overall length suggested by the Western Powder Manual of 1.59 inches, then that means there's going to be 0.432 inches of the bullet inside of the case. When I compare that to the other bullets I have, like the Nosler and Hornady and Zero, it looks like the Sierra bullets is going to be seated deepest into the case with the least amount of powder room. That would lead me to believe that I could use this same data for all my other bullets and be fine, and maybe even sticking closer to the top end of the load range. That is depending on how this trial ends up going with the Sierra bullets. All the other bullets I have are going to have less bullet inside of the case, so there's going to be more case capacity and, in theory, less pressure. I think this will end up being more useful once I actually get the chronograph data. This is actually probably all useless, but I kind of enjoy documenting this type of thing. All these bullets are constructed differently. They're all going to cause different amounts of pressure, but we'll find out. Let's load up a ladder. Actually, before I do, looking back at the Western manual, they use a 8.275 inch barrel. Mine is a 6.75 inch barrel, but the last inch is ported, so we'll say about 6 inches. Looking at ballistics by the inch, maybe lose 100 to 150 feet per second from the 2-inch difference. So if max velocity for their data is 1,554 feet per second, I would guess I would start to worry if I start getting over 1,400 feet per second-ish. We'll see what we end up getting, or, see when I start getting, like, compressed loads. I also decided to look at the seating depth, since sometimes the Western powder manual has kind of messed up seating depths. Like the cartridge overall length for 240 grain XTPs with accurate number 9 is 1.56 inches, which is way too short. The cannula is like significantly below the case mouth. Hornady recommends 1.6 inches, and that lines up really well with the cannula. So Sierra says 1.6, Western says 1.59. That's pretty close, but I did make a dummy round, and the 1.59 looks a little bit better to me. A little bit more centered in the cannula, so we'll go with that. All right, so loaded up our ladder here, starting at 20 grains and going up to 22 grains using 0.5 grain increments. I was originally going to go with 21.5, but ended up going with 22 as the top end of the range because it didn't really look like we were being compressed, or if we were being compressed, it was just barely being compressed. So let's head to the range and we'll see what the chronograph data gets us. All right, so here's the average velocities I got from my 6-shot groups. The recoil felt stout, but the 44 Raging Hunter weighs a ton, and with the porting it was fine. The max listed charge in the Western powder manual was 22.6 grains, and I went up to 22 grains for my max. I don't feel like my reloads were compressed at all, and with my final velocity, it was right around 1,300 feet per second, which is well under my estimated, danger velocity of 1,400 feet per second. Looking at my velocities, I would guess if I upped the charge to 22.5 grains, I would get around 1,330 feet per second. The last H110 load I ran using 23 grains with my 0 jacketed soft points was 1,346 feet per second. And most of the charge ranges I've seen for H110 were 23 to 24 grains, so I was well under the max there. So it looks like I can't really get quite up to H110 speeds, but I wasn't blinded by a fireball with each shot, which from a practical standpoint is a good thing, but from a, dumb fun standpoint, it is kind of a detractor actually. Either way, it does get me close to H110 speeds at a pretty significant discount. So, am I going to grab an 8-pound bottle of Accurate 11FS at a discount? No. Because while making this video, I realized I actually have plenty of H110 and Accurate number 9, and, since everything I touch turns into a massive project, I ended up creating a spreadsheet with all my powder inventory and realized I'm actually pretty good on pistol powders for a while, or at least I sure as heck don't need to buy an 8-pound jug of any pistol powder. Maybe I will try this out with the 180 grain XTPs in the future to make kind of a, nonsense fast 44 Magnum defensive round, but that's for a future video. Anyway, thanks for watching.